I think, yeah, they're probably, they are an impediment to peace. They are the ones who invaded. Like, this is also partially the reason why I categorize like Crimea's annexation entirely in a separate category than like what Russia has been doing since invading the rest of Ukraine. Okay, there is a difference there.
So how
Russia's Vladimir Putin, adorning the combat fatigues yesterday in Kursk, has come out once again, this time in a suit, and is now talking about the ceasefire conditions. And it turns out he has conditions of his own. Let's take a look at what he had to say and figure out whether or not this will hold.
How are they going to use these 30 days? Are they going to use it in order to continue the forced mobilization in Ukraine, in order to supply weapons to those areas, in order to newly mobilized units to undergo training?
Just came to say goodbye. HasanAbi's going down a path I can follow. Just like Anakin, he's letting his anger get the best of him. All the fighting with other streamers isn't good for my health. I wish you the best. Thanks for all the work you do, Hasan. Still going to watch YouTube you, but I just can't watch the live stream anymore. Peace. Love you all. What? Just because he's on camera doesn't mean he's a streamer. That's Vladimir Putin. And the previous guy who was on camera on a live stream was the current president of the United States of America, Donald Trump. Just letting you know, these guys aren't streamers. They're world leaders. But thanks, man. Thanks for the announcement of your departure, like it's a goddamn airport. He said like Anakin. For the record, this person is just a serial yapper. They asked me for an explainer on their timeout. I told them not to be annoying. I went to sleep and they hit me with 80 whisper messages. Yeah, no, I know. Like, there are moments where I do talk about other content creators, especially in terms of like how much propaganda that they're doing for or whatever. But it's pretty funny to come in right now when I am not doing that and be like, it's over for me. I'll still keep watching and I support you. But this Putin guy, this Putler guy, this Trump guy, this Putler guy, not exactly a big fan of these streamers. I feel like, you know, your Rainbow Six content was good. I've never seen them get 3 kills in any Rainbow Six Siege game. And the very fact that you're still focusing on these guys when they got no motion whatsoever is kind of unacceptable to me. Gotta say, I'm out. This stream is like 50% bitching about another influencer. Yeah, for once. Yeah, finally, for once, this HasanAbi guy is covering the news, dude. Finally, for once.
Or none of this is going to happen. How are we going to resolve the issues of control or verification?
Twitch streaming is awesome because it's one of the few places where you can both be eating all the time and away from your desk all the time when you just let videos run, but also simultaneously pause entirely too much and offer entirely too much commentary because you're a real yapper. Platform world leaders, not play enough video games, play too much video games at the same time is awesome. It's basically make your own adventure. I'm Schrodinger's streamer always. Depending on what you like or what you don't like, I fill both of those roles at the same time. For example, because I speak for 8 hours a day on hot button topics, someone can come in and say, I'm a liberal Zionist. And then another person can come in and say, I'm actually a Hamas terrorist. Many of them just say I'm a Hamas terrorist. But there are some who also say, I engage in, you know, liberal Zionist propaganda. It's just awesome. There's no winning. And at a certain point, I think people realize, like, okay, I will make up my own mind. Maybe this guy isn't what I think he is. And the only way that you can do that is if you come in here and you listen for an extended period of time.
How can we be guaranteed that none of this is going to happen in the future? How are we going to control this? I think on the level of common sense, everyone understands this. This is a very serious question: who is going to give orders to ceasefire? And what is the value of these orders? Can you imagine about 2,000 kilometers? Who is going to determine who and where violated this agreement? That's an area of 2,000 kilometers. And then who is going to blame who? The violations of this agreement. All of these are questions that need to be thoroughly studied on both sides. So the idea in itself is correct and we support it, but there are questions that need to be discussed. And I think we need to discuss this with our American partners. Maybe we need to have a call with President Trump and discuss this. But the idea in itself to stop this conflict in a peaceful way, that's something that we support.
President Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, has now arrived in Moscow to brief Kremlin officials on the Ukraine ceasefire proposal. Earlier today...
How do you not let the hate get to you? Because I have firmly held convictions about my worldview and also have an incredible community of like-minded individuals who not only listen to what I have to say, but then also make up their own minds, go out and change their lives in a meaningful way, and hopefully slowly but surely change the world around them in a meaningful way. That's it. That's literally, that's the reason why all of this stuff is just background noise, you know? He also has a ton of money. I mean, that definitely doesn't hurt. Yes, that certainly doesn't hurt, you know? C-Star, thank you for the 25 get the subs. Right after a chatter said I have a ton of money. It's all, and I also have good friends and family around me. Yeah, I agree with 99.9% of shit, and I've learned a tremendous amount from you, but you're still an enormous asshole. Yeah, but I like to think that I'm an enormous asshole to people who are being enormous assholes to others, you know? People who are being ginormous assholes to marginalized communities, minorities, people who are vulnerable. That's it. I've never said I won't bully someone. I bully motherfuckers all the time. I just bully people who I think deserve it, which certainly creates a lot of anger and animosity from the audiences of the people who deserve it. But yeah, I'm gonna, you know, make fun of a or a pedophile or a psychopath. Like, you're in the wrong place.
Though Russian President Vladimir Putin said he has, quote, reservations about the 30-day ceasefire, adding that there are still many things that need to be discussed before a deal gets done.
We agree with the proposals to end hostilities, but we proceed from the fact that this end should be such that it would lead to long-term peace and eliminate the root causes of the crisis. But I think that we need to talk about this with our American colleagues, partners, maybe call President Trump and discuss it with him. But the idea itself, to end this conflict by peaceful means, is supported by us.
CNN Chief International Correspondent Clarissa Ward is live in Kyiv. Clarissa, taking a look at the reaction from Russia, which is so essential, right? You heard White House officials saying if Russia does not accept this, then they'll know who the impediment to peace is. How are you?
That's so funny. Yeah. I mean, come on, dude. I think, yeah, they're probably, they are an impediment to peace. They are the ones who invaded. Like, this is also partially the reason why I categorize like Crimea's annexation entirely in a separate category than like what Russia has been doing since invading the rest of Ukraine. Okay, there is a difference there. Like, you are an aggressor, a very violent aggressor. You're an aggressor in both instances, but at least on one you had like a lease agreement and more sympathies from the people that lived there, as opposed to what you've done since then. The reality of the matter is, Russia is an impediment to peace. Like, it's ridiculous to make it seem as though they're not. They're literally in Ukraine. They've annexed Ukraine. Now they want to take permanently from Ukraine.
Are you reading what we're hearing out of the Kremlin?
Well, I think it's a somewhat enigmatic response, but roughly along the lines of what we expected, in the sense that President Putin was very keen to heap praise upon President Trump. He called the idea in principle great. He expressed gratitude, but then he went on to basically delineate a number of issues that Russia would want clarification on. Whether this is a stalling tactic designed to give Russia more time, or whether this is an act of sincerely engaging in this process in a meaningful way, remains to be seen. One of the issues that he brought up was the issue of Kursk, where Russian forces have essentially now isolated the Ukrainian forces and a withdrawal of Ukraine.
He also said he would treat mercenaries as terrorists in Kursk, and that like, you know, he's gonna capture Kursk and most likely torture every Ukrainian soldier and torture the foreign mercenaries extra hard. That's basically what he was spelling out.
Ukrainian forces. Looks like it's already underway, but certainly we're talking days, not weeks, before Kursk will likely fall back under complete Russian control. He also raised the issue of, will it be possible for Ukraine during this 30 days to remobilize? Will it be possible for them to regroup, reconstitute, rearm? What kind of guarantee?
No, Kursk is a Russian city. It's not inside of Ukraine. It was a Ukrainian counteroffensive in the midst of the Russian expansion into Ukraine, where mostly foreign the foreign battalions pushed into Kursk, Kursk Oblast in Russia.
Guarantees could we be given that wouldn't happen? What kind of guarantees can we be given in terms of how the ceasefire will be monitored, or how it will be enforced, and who gets to say when hostility?
Kossak Gundi was a Brit who joined the Ukrainian Marines, not Foreign Legion, but was captured and obviously tortured by Russians. Jesus Christ. I do think it's kind of ironic that for the past couple of years, a lot of NATO Andes have been saying, oh, if there's any ceasefire whatsoever, Russia will be able to use that as an opportunity to recoup their losses and regroup and rearm and attack even harder. And to them, I said this was a bullshit excuse because both sides have that opportunity. And in the process, if they were to go back to fighting, then you're back to square one anyway. Now, it's interesting because now Russia is saying that because they also don't want to fucking stop pummeling Ukraine right now when they're in the process of retaking Kursk. Now Putin is using that same excuse. It's fucking ridiculous. Okay? It's ridiculous. It's idiotic. It's bullshit. Anyone that says that is a direct impediment to peace. But of course, Vladimir Putin was an impediment to peace. Now, how have we arrived at this situation? Perhaps it would have been better if the fucking American leader, our glorious president, Donald J. Trump, didn't spend the past month and a half shitting on our proxy that we have used and abused in this fucking process, that have a very valid claim to, you know, want to rid their borders of a Russian invasion. Perhaps you wouldn't look like such a fucking asshole if you didn't actively, seemingly defend Adolf Hitler, okay? They are so goddamn bad at diplomacy, it pisses me off. Because on the one hand, I do agree that you have to bring Russia to the table to set the stage for a ceasefire and permanent negotiations and a permanent cessation to hostilities. You have to do that. There's no other way to do that. You can't defeat them militarily, so there's nothing you can do in that process. But also at the same time, you probably shouldn't undermine your side of the bargain so aggressively at the behest of the dudes who you are supposed to be negotiating against. It was a ridiculous move that I criticized. And those who have been in here long enough know that the reason why I criticized it is because I also want a permanent end to the hostilities. So even when Trump seemingly was going to present himself as seemingly was going to be on the right side, okay, in terms of putting an end to the senseless death, he still fucked it all the way up. And now you got you got Putin taking great advantage of that. He's taking advantage of that. America even went so far as to stop intelligence sharing with Ukraine, albeit for a brief moment. That is insane. Marco Rubio came out and said, we're never going to arm Russia. That is the most insane. What the fuck was that? Like, why did he say that? What is happening? My "we're never going to help Russia invade Ukraine" shirt is bringing up more questions than the shirt itself answers. A real I'm not a pedophile t-shirt wearing moment here, you know? It's ridiculous. As someone who is an advocate for peace, as someone who is an advocate for an end to this war, this unjustifiable war that Russia started, make no mistake, I understand the necessity to bring them to the fucking table. I, however, don't understand why this dumb fuck is turning around and shitting on Zelensky and removing whatever kind of leverage, like whatever kind of minor leverage that the Ukrainians might have in this process. It's ridiculous.
These actually stop. So some will interpret this as sort of willful filibustering, if you will. And certainly when we heard from the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky this morning.
It is absolutely absurdly unrealistic expectation to think the side of a war currently winning across the entire front line and rolling up its enemy would stop and take a ceasefire is brain dead. There needs to be an actual peace deal with concessions, and negotiations can happen and occur without a ceasefire. Ceasefire offers pure optics. I think this is a silly way to approach the subject matter, especially considering the material losses that the Russian side has also incurred. And also what you're saying unironically is proving the point that NATO people were making over and over again, which is to arm Ukraine to the fucking gills then and try to get them to not lose against the Russian front lines. Therefore, they can have more leverage. A foolhardy bargain. A foolhardy endeavor that definitely extended the war process and pushed back a potential ceasefire negotiation when Ukraine had the most leverage it ever did. I don't think it's smart to do this at all. You got to do one or the other. Either you bring Russia to the table and actually implement some ceasefire negotiations, or while not, disarming your side of the process, or you arm the fuck out of Ukraine and even send in mercenaries so that they have manpower, because that's what they're lacking the most. Re-up and rearm Ukraine and, I don't know, extend this battle for as long as it takes. Ukraine will suffer in the process. Ukraine will incur all of the losses in this process, of course. But the goal there would be to, I guess, undermine and force Russia into a battle of attrition that will most likely ruin not only their economy, but their future as well. The future of Russia is under threat in that situation if they just keep melting their fucking young in trench warfare. It's a really shitty situation, especially for Ukraine. Now, they're young. You sound like you're talking about aliens. They're youth. They're an entire generation lost in the flatlands of Ukraine. No one is saying don't make a peace deal. What we're saying is Russia won't take a ceasefire until that happens, because Russia is winning universally at this current point in time and only strengthening their bargaining position. I mean, what matters in that process for Russia is also, is it worth? I don't think it's worth. Yeah, the Russian lady didn't hold back when asked about the war. This channel also, this was filmed in Moscow in May 2023. Question, are we losing? I wish we had lost because I don't like it at all. They're killing civilians in Ukraine. It's not, it's nice seeing young Russians be candid about their country's choices in interviews, something that takes way more bravery to do than most places. Yeah. Ukrainians, we're all Slavs, brotherly people, although now they don't like it when we say that. They destroy homes. Bakhmut was completely destroyed. Mariupol. Everything is destroyed in Melitopol. People have nowhere to live. My friend lives in Donetsk. They're bombing there, and he can't apply to university. They're in total shambles over there. You know who thought something about NATO attacking us? No one would attack us. We're a huge country. It would just be unprofitable for them to attack us. This is complete nonsense. The war was started over nothing. It's true. That part is also true. That's why I said, when Russia decided, when the Russian government decided, no, the only way to stop NATO from further advancing into along the Russian border is to invade Ukraine. That was the most idiotic fucking thing you could do. Why was it the most idiotic thing you could do? Because you already had decent trade relations by way of energy with Europe, and no one actually wanted. If I know that no one was going to allow Ukraine into NATO, you think Vladimir Putin didn't know that? That's an insane fucking short-sighted and otherwise idiotic thing to do. And you know what else is going to happen in this process? Here, I'll give you my fucking speculation. Let's say there is a permanent ceasefire. There is a permanent end to the hostilities. And in the process, Russia forces America and Ukraine's hand to permanently annex, with recognition, the 4 Ukrainian territories that it currently occupies. Okay, 20% of the 20% of Ukrainian territory. Let's say that happens. Do you think honestly that, and this is why I also separate Crimea from the rest of this process, and you'll understand exactly why I'm separating Crimea. Do you fucking think that those guys whose homes have been blown up, who might have even had sympathies with Russia, who have immediate family members who live in Russia, who speak Russian, that now hate Russia because their fucking homes have been exploded by Russia? Do you think that those guys are not going to do insurgency? How long can a country like Russia, especially when it is now inside of its own territorial boundaries, maintain a counterinsurgency initiative in an otherwise hostile nation, in an otherwise hostile terrain? How long? You are going to have a real major crisis of Ukrainian terrorism. Okay, that's it. That's it. There's no way to deal with this permanently. There's no way to deal with this permanently. You cannot, it is not like Crimea at all for this reason, because if you take over an area with its own military that already had existing sympathies or had people that were closely aligned and identified ethnically as your people or whatever, and you already had a fucking lease agreement for a military base regardless in Sevastopol, but you took it over without firing a fucking shot, that's entirely different. The reception from that population is going to be entirely different in terms of long-term stability. Okay? As opposed to every other place that Russia has blown into fucking oblivion. You cannot strong arm people, okay? You can't. They're always going to want to be free. Even if you give them citizenship, you're always going to have to be paranoid about whether or not they will want revenge. And they will definitely want revenge. Do you understand what I mean? This is a major difference. This is the major difference as to why I categorize Crimea very differently than the rest of eastern Ukraine that Russia has annexed. They will never be able to permanently fucking maintain annexation in eastern Ukraine. Okay, Russia has won counterinsurgent wars, though, dude. There's a very big difference between Chechnya and you know, even Dagestan, if you want to consider that, and Ukraine. Okay, there's a big difference. First of all, Chechnya didn't have fucking NATO weapons, NATO training, and also an entire national identity that revolved around being rid of the USSR or anything like that. There's a difference between Ukraine and Chechnya in this regard. Ukraine is a fully established, Ukraine is a fully established nation state. Sure, it was very poor even before the Russian invasion, but it doesn't matter. Like, these are people with a sense of national identity and comfort and security that they got from being not a part of Russia, but also, you know, being a part of a sovereign nation. In Crimea, they installed politicians and did a covert op, not directly invade Crimea, you mean, right? As opposed to Ukraine? Yes, there was no, like, bombing campaigns in Crimea. That's what I mean. There's a very big difference between there's a very big difference between annexation of that sort versus annexation that is impossible to manage. Permanent annexation of that sort is impossible to manage. Unless you literally bring in settlers, unless you literally bring in ethnic Russians. But the problem with Ukraine is that how do you distinguish between someone being of Ukrainian heritage or someone being of Russian heritage but now fucking hates Russia because Russia bombed their house and bombed and killed their fucking neighbors and bombed their school and is going to want revenge against the people that perpetrated those acts? Yes, I know Russia brought settlers into Crimea, but they also brought settlers into Crimea by ethnically years prior to the Crimean invasion under the USSR. So there's a long history there in terms of changing the demographics of Crimea far before the USSR dissolved. Yeah. Here's the truth, and PR Zur is correct. Crimean Tatars constituted the majority of Crimea's population from the time of ethnogenesis until the mid-19th century, and the largest ethnic population until the end of the 19th century. Russia attempted to purge Crimean Tatars through a combination of physical violence, intimidation, and forced resettlement, and legalized forms of discrimination between 1783 and 1900. But then also, even in the USSR, there was also like an ethnic displacement that took place as well. It's not just the Tsar. It's not Tsar's Russia that cleansed the region. Like, there was also there wasn't a significant attempt to, like, USSR did a lot of Russification. This is true. Like, let's not act like that wasn't the case. So I don't know. I mean, this is part of the reason why I often will talk about Crimea versus Eastern Ukraine. And why it is a major issue why it is an unimaginable issue for Russia to invade Ukraine and then try to permanently annex these territories inside of Eastern Ukraine. It's not something that's going to make, it's not something that's sustainable. That's just the way I see it. I don't think that Russia will be able to permanently have a sustainable permanent annexed land in Eastern Ukraine. It'll open up so many opportunities of espionage. It will create it is basically a weapon to wield against Russia permanently. Okay? You let in all of the, let's say you offer citizenship to every single Ukrainian in the annexed territories. A lot of them are understandably going to be seeking revenge. Many of them are trained. There are plenty of people who have taken up arms against Russia. Let's say that they actually join like covert operations against Russia. When you talk about Russia, all of the former Soviet states will have a lot to say to you. Okay, so what? I think that is going to inevitably lead to more volatility for Russia. Way to ignore the Banderite terror inflicted on the region. Much of the area Russia holds currently, decades of shelling, insane anti-Russian racism, etc. Also, this area is in large part Russian-speaking as a mother tongue and has sympathies with Russia. You also seem to be ignorant of this or just ignoring the history. No, I think that is fucking maximalist copium at this point. Kharkiv is a great example of an area that had a lot of sympathies for Russia, fairly sympathetic to Russia. Everything that you're describing would fit the bill for Kharkiv. Look at Kharkiv now. Look at Kharkiv now and their attitudes towards Russian annexation now. Why the thank God we got liberated by being bombed? What are you, a fucking George W. Bush supporter? You think that they brought democracy to Iraq? Is that what you're going to say? This is the nuance that I try to bring to the table when talking about critical support or no critical support in terms of like countries that are outside of the boundaries and the influence of Western empire. A lot of people, when they're talking about China, a lot of leftists, when they're talking about China or when they're talking about Russia, sometimes come across like they're fucking, come across like they're hogs for these countries. You know what I mean? Critical support doesn't mean uncritical support. Like when talking about Xinjiang with China, like there are definitely people that basically will justify the Chinese government's attitude and say it was the right thing to do. I don't think it was the right thing to do. And I don't spend a good deal of time on this stuff because I think the way, like the place I have in this media landscape is to obviously try to get people to understand that like a lot of these nations are comprised of individuals. They're not monolithic, that have decent reasons to hate America and that we shouldn't hate them and we shouldn't wage war. But the reality of the matter is, yes, of course, every fucking nation state engages in brutal acts of conquest. This is just what nation states do. I'm not an anarchist. I think that there's reason for nation states to exist, at least in this time frame. But, it's it is ridiculous to make it seem as though the incredibly inherently violent action that the Russian government has taken in terms of like blowing up every fucking territory that they conquered, okay, that they're trying to physically, militarily annex, was actually done in an act of liberation. That's not how that works. That's not how that works. That's ridiculous. Like, oh yeah, they're doing it for liberation. Vladimir Putin said he's going to save Donbass. That's why he killed more people than since 2014, Green Men or like the Azov battalion blowing up and using artillery in LPR and DPR against like their own citizens. Like that's ridiculous. That's not a liberatory act in that situation. Okay? You're not liberating LPR and DPR. Yeah, it's giving free Palestine from Hamas. Exactly. Yeah, it's also like it's the same principle behind like you're so libbed out on Ukraine, I can't listen. I don't know how much of it is to protect your image and how much it is actually your view, but you give dog shit analysis on the topic. I don't think it's dog shit analysis. I think it's very fair analysis, which is why every liberal thinks I'm an Adolf Hitler lover. It's okay to say that a right-wing kleptocracy that unjustifiably invaded another nation, a nation that did have a lot of fucking nationalist sentiment, did the wrong thing by invading that nation because now those nationalists are going to overtake the country. They're going to be the next leaders of Ukraine eventually. I hope that doesn't happen, but it feels like that is probably what's going to happen. And they all have fucking, they all have training, they have American weapons, not good for the future of Europe, not good for the future of any country, really. But Russia played a big role in that. There's also a reason why I look to China in terms of its foreign affairs, okay? Not its domestic affairs, but at least in terms of its foreign affairs, and believe that they do a much better job than the United States of America and Russia on that front. Like they are infinitely more restrained, and that's why they're fucking popping off.
Начнется, Россия будет выплачивать кредиты Украине, всем, пострадавшим каким-то городам, Украине. Вот, то есть это ударит по нашей экономике, у нас начнется рост цен. Мы это почувствуем, потому что налоги.
We're going to feel it because of taxes and stuff like that. It's going to be very difficult for us. I was just reading the article that's calling the foreign policy strat the reverse Kissinger to align Russia to weaken China. Makes sense, but seems futile because Sleeping Dragon has awoken and just further alienated the U.S. Yeah. I think so. I think it's a silly strategy as well. I mean, that's my suspicion as well. It's ironic because it seemed like a 4chan thing initially when Vivek Ramaswamy was talking about it, and now and Tucker Carlson was talking about it, and now it seems like it's like government policy to basically turn around and try to do a Sino-Soviet split, but reverse. I just don't know if that's even remotely possible. The USSR did not have global trade was not where it's at in the time of USSR. The USSR did not have a network of trade that directly tied its existence to the existence of empire in the way that China has. China's economy is on an upwards trajectory and slated to beat out the United States economy by probably the end of this decade, if not earlier. And America's trajectory has obviously stagnated, or maybe even on a downward shift. Like this is a very, very different. This is a very different circumstance. So I don't know if I'm Russia, okay, the one thing Russia did, even if I were to remove myself from the morality of what Russia's actions were and try to figure out why Russia did what it did, it wanted to penetrate and show the rest of the world, specifically the global South and every other global leader, that America had a dent in its armor and that Russia would poke through it militarily, saying like, no, the international rule-based order is gone. Gone are the days where America is the world police. We have nukes. They have nukes too. Guess what? We can do whatever the fuck we want to whichever country we want to. And it's one of the only countries that one of the only great powers, if you want to call it that is like willing to combat America, even by way of proxies, right? So like that's somewhat the goal here from Russia's perspective. But if that's their goal here, then why the fuck would they turn around and be like, all right, we're going to separate ourselves from China. We're going to separate ourselves from China and then join the American side. You know, I just don't think that is, because if that is the only logical reason for why Russia militarily invaded Ukraine, eastern Ukraine specifically, then they have no reason to try and split from China. They have no reason to split from China at all, especially looking at what China's trajectory is and looking at what America's trajectory is, especially because these guys have no ideological convictions, okay? China, ideological project in terms of its domestic affairs, doesn't maintain some sort of global war against capitalism in even the way that like the USSR at times did, or even in the way that China under Mao did at a certain point. They don't do that. And the only thing holding these countries together in allegiance is just being fucked over by America and fucked over by the West. That's it. They are unironically, their position is unironically campist, I think, where they're just like, yeah, fuck America and everything America stands for, fuck the West and everything the West stands for. And if you close your eyes for a brief moment and try to understand the world from their perspective, it is a fairly understandable perspective to have. The Western powers destroyed the USSR and didn't just like humiliate the USSR. They literally materially destroyed the USSR, picked it apart for scraps. The people that are fucking in charge now were placeholders created by those who were in the KGB that had sympathies towards the West. And those guys still also kind of feel humiliated and still understandably feel mad. Like there was so much death and destruction in the aftermath of the dissolution of the USSR. Like these guys still have an understandable frustration against Western powers. They were there when it collapsed. They watched it happen. They'd made the most of it by stealing as many state resources as possible. And I don't think they let go of their hatred for the United States of America or Western powers in general, even if they themselves are capitalist, okay? So what holds these countries together is not dissimilar to the way that a secondary market has been formed because of American sanctions. The American sanctions regime has created a secondary market of trade around the world now, because if you sanction everybody, then you might as well be sanctioning yourself. And that's what's going on here. It's the same as like the resentment and the allegiances that you watch unfold around the globe. Let's get back to this now.
This was before Putin spoke, I should add. He said, look, it's pretty much clear from the silence that we're hearing from Russia that they're not interested in meaningfully engaging with peace, that they want this war to continue grinding on. I don't think that we can make that conclusion deductively from what President Putin said during his meeting, during his press conference with the Belarusian President Lukashenko. But it will be very interesting, I would say, Brianna and Boris, to hear later on, after all those meetings and conversations with Trump's envoy Witkoff come to an end, whether there is a sort of plan for moving forward. Because, again, Putin had left that pretty ambiguous. He said maybe he would talk to President Trump in the coming days. None of that giving any sense of urgency that this is an issue that is going to be addressed and clarified and put into practice in the near future as the U.S. had hoped.
David, I wonder what you make of the timing here, that the NATO Secretary General meeting with Donald Trump. We're set to hear from them directly in just moments, as we're hearing Vladimir Putin say sort of yes to this deal, but also no.
So the timing of Secretary General Rutte showing up is a little bit coincidental. I don't think anybody knew when they scheduled that this would also be the day that you'd be sending Steve Witkoff into Moscow and so forth. I think yes, but is exactly the right answer, and Clarissa had this just right. Putin's in a tough spot here. He can't be seen as the one party who's saying, I won't do a ceasefire. And yet, a ceasefire is not in his interest right now while they're taking back Russian territory that the Ukrainians had seized, and while he thinks he's on the march. The second problem he's got is that he's concerned that the ceasefire will be something he can't get out of, and what he really wants is, if there is a long-term ceasefire, to have a number of different issues, that Ukraine can't enter NATO, that along the way Russia will be able to resolve what they call their long historic issues, which is essentially that Ukraine is a part of Russia. So he's a little afraid of being jammed, and I think you're seeing him wiggle his way through.
Yeah, and I wonder what you think about what you're hearing of that, especially considering this idea, the Kursk piece of this, where he says it's not clear how the situation would develop in Kursk and elsewhere if a ceasefire was implemented. That development in Kursk of Russia taking back that territory is something that happened since the U.S. suspended, it's now been reinstated, but suspended military aid to the Ukrainians. So in a way, there's almost this cycle. The U.S. takes an action, we see Russia taking back Kursk, and now that seems to be dissuading them in at least one of these elements from wanting to get on board.
Well, they haven't completely taken Kursk back, but they've almost got all the territory back.
That's right. They're saying it's the vast majority of it,
yeah.
Right?
But what I'm watching for is how will Trump react to not the no, but the explanations beyond, where Trump said, he accepts the concept of a ceasefire, but was translated from the Russian as with nuances. And then his spokesperson and others have filled in some of those nuances, that they need to see a new administration in Ukraine. They need to see the world community recognize their annexation of 4 sections of eastern Ukraine that they don't completely even control right now. The list goes on and on. So my question will be, how is Trump going to respond to that? Will he be convinced by Putin's arguments as he has in the past? And I suspect Putin doesn't want to have those full-throated arguments until he's face-to-face with Trump, so he can explain in a reasonable manner, you can't expect us to do a ceasefire and still have a standing Ukrainian army that could attack.
It does lend itself to Trump's sort of political history. The rare vision that he's held politically his entire political life is that other countries are ripping off the United States. Right. He points to NATO and says that. He points to Canada and says that, European allies as well. How does that play politically now that he's actually pursuing that as a policy?
Well, what's interesting is that in theory, you would think the United States public appreciates NATO, right? They understand that NATO protects us. However, reality is that these folks are also hurting at home. They're also seeing their friends being rounded up who have lived in their neighborhoods for many, many years. They're seeing a chaotic country right now. They're seeing the federal government being cut, people losing jobs. Then they look over at NATO and say, why isn't NATO paying their 2% of GDP? Why are we doing that? Look at my family right now that is hurting. So politically, it plays well for Donald Trump. The reality is, way down the road, I mean, talk to Kim or David, and they will tell you, if we don't have the United States and NATO together, then we are in big trouble.
And Clarissa, I wonder, especially as we hear Putin saying that they have to look at the root causes of the crisis, which of course we've heard before. One of those being the current Ukrainian government, we should say.
My theory on this is very clear. In order for capitalism to continue, well, this is not my theory, this is Lenin. But in order for capitalism to exist, you have to constantly seek out new vectors of profit. And in order to continue doing that, you have to dominate the global south, imperialism. Imperialism is a necessity for capitalism to continue. Okay? My theory, beyond plagiarizing Lenin, is that in order for American capitalism and American imperialism to continue, the American media has to sometimes manufacture consent for wars, but more significantly than that, pull back on doing any sort of propaganda or any sort of talk about wars at all. And because imperialism happens out there, Americans don't necessarily think about that. They don't think about the bounties of empire. They don't think about the benefits that they get as being a part of the labor aristocracy, right? Because aristocracy just simply means that, like, there's hyper exploitation happening in the global south, and that is the reason why you can get a fucking t-shirt for $5. Okay? Now, that is the reason why America as a nation, is an incredibly violent one, but Americans themselves, without recognizing the empire that keeps this country materially wealthy in the ways that it does, is always on the background. It's never in the forefront. We never think about the consequences of these actions. So Americans themselves can feel like they are a peaceful nation. That's why I think a lot of liberals, a lot of people on Globe Twitter, a lot of people who are pro-NATO are actually more honest about their selfish desires to continue wars around the world and to maintain NATO, because they recognize that it plays a major role in their comfortable existence. Why are you saying please? What? Oh, is there a new emote? Oh, you guys are so stupid. Anyway, but this also presents a unique opportunity because Americans don't think about global war all that much and how it factors into their day-to-day existence all that much, and the benefits that global war gives Americans in terms of, like, how cheap certain goods are. You can actually convince them that permanent war is bad. And that's precisely the reason why a guy like Donald Trump can come in and portray himself as a peaceful dove. That's the advantage here, that, like, the majority of Americans see themselves as peaceful people of hating war. And especially as material conditions worsen here, then you can make an even stronger, more convincing argument that we probably shouldn't be spending all this money overseas and we should be spending it on ourselves. Now, of course, Donald Trump is lying about that because he will continue doing wars all around the globe, obviously. But that's my position on the matter, on why Americans are, like, so anti-NATO. And that's partially because they just don't recognize that, you know, NATO, albeit a very violent force, is what allows America to continue dominating the planet.
That is something that he's looking at as the root cause of the crisis. He wants Zelensky to be received in Ukraine if what we hear from Trump is oh, but look, Russia didn't say no.
I think that it is no exaggeration to say that the Ukrainians have been through an emotional roller coaster over the past few weeks with everything that happened between Zelensky and Trump in the Oval Office. I think that there was a huge amount of relief and even triumph, honestly, coming out of those meetings in Jeddah that it seemed like the relationship was back on track, that it seemed like Ukraine could take control of the narrative again and essentially say, listen, we are not the obstacle to peace here. We are ready for it. The onus is now on Russia. And I think there will be some serious disappointment and even some eye rolling if President Trump takes Putin completely at his word and doesn't apply some rigorous skepticism to what is going on here. And I think also, frankly, if we're being honest, the Ukrainians would like to see a wedge driven between this sort of kinship that we have seen between President Putin and President Trump. They would like to see President Trump get exasperated with President Putin and lose his patience even with President Putin. And it remains to be seen what the response will be. I mean, I just heard some tidbits from earlier where it said that President Trump had interpreted Putin's comments as being promising. So unlikely that we're necessarily going to see that wedge anytime soon. But the Ukrainians understand in principle that the most important thing here going forward through trials and tribulations is to keep that relationship on track. I spoke to one former minister. He said we need this relationship to be less about emotion and more about common sense.
Не что иное, как временная передышка для украинских военных, больше ничего. И мы считаем, что наша цель все-таки это долгосрочное мирное урегулирование. Мы к этому стремимся. Мирное урегулирование, которое учитывает нашей стороны, наша озабоченность известна. Вот какие-то такие шаги, которые имитируют мирные действия, мне кажется, никому не нужны в данной ситуации.
Yeah, they did the NATO Andy retort.
The UN says Israel has...
They did the NATO Andy retort by saying, oh, this will offer Ukraine temporary respite, and we can't have that. Ceasefire is bullshit. God, they are so fucking Israel coded. It's not even funny. Jesus Christ. It's just like, it is just straight up Israel shit, okay? Aren't there any... What? Israel but poor? I mean, what is Israel without America? Get out of here. Don't fucking say Russia is poor while comparing it to fucking Israel and then saying Israel is rich. That's...